The thirst below. The letter arrived 3 weeks after the funeral. A small, official-looking envelope, smelling faintly of dust and disuse, as if it had been waiting years in a forgotten drawer. It informed Arthur Finch that he was the sole inheritor of his estranged great-uncle's property, a modest but crumbling farmstead nestled deep in the rural isolation of Blackwood Hollow. Arthur, a city man through and through, had barely known the man. He suspected this was less an act of familial affection and more the universe deciding his quiet, unassuming life needed a sudden, violent jolt. The jolt arrived in the form of the farm itself. It wasn't picturesque decay. It was festering neglect. Weeds choked the yard, paint peeled like sunburnt skin, and the air hung thick with the scent of mildew and damp earth. But the focal point, the property's silent, unblinking eye, was the well. It stood in the center of the yard, a ring of moss-covered stones surrounding a dark, circular void. No pump, just a rusted iron handle attached to a chain disappearing into the blackness. Arthur, used to taps that delivered clean water on demand, eyed it with suspicion. The estate agent, a man whose nervous chatter hadn't quite masked his haste to leave, had assured him the house had modern plumbing, fed, presumably, from this ancient source. His first night was restless. The house creaked like a dying beast. Wind rattled the window panes, sounding suspiciously like scratching. But the most unsettling thing was the silence from the well. A silence that seemed too profound, too absolute. As if it weren't just deep, but utterly empty of the natural sounds of water or stone. He needed water for his coffee the next morning. The tap ran sluggishly, spitting rusty water. He grimaced and tried the well. He hauled the heavy iron bucket up, hand over hand. The chain groaned, the old wood pulley shrieked. Finally, the bucket broke the lip of the well. The water wasn't clear. It was murky, the color of weak tea, and smelled off. Not stagnant, exactly, but with a faint, metallic tang underneath the damp earth smell. He hesitated, then poured a little into a glass. It tasted cool, blessedly cold, but the flavor was strange. Like iron and loam and something else, something primal and unsettling. He dumped it, and used bottled water he'd brought. The next few days were a blur of unpacking and tentative exploration. The house was a museum of a life he didn't understand, moth-eaten furniture, dusty books on forgotten crafts, and a pervasive sense of solitude. He tried to ignore the well, but it drew his gaze constantly. Standing there, silent and watchful, a dark mouth in the earth. The sounds started subtly. A faint splash at night, when there should have been none. A low hum that seemed to vibrate in the soles of his feet when he was near the well, gone the moment he moved away. He told himself it was the pipes, the wind, his imagination settling into the quiet. Then came the smell. A new odor, distinct from the mildew and dust. Musky, like something wet and decaying, but with a strange, almost sweet undertone that was sickening. It seemed to waft from the well, strongest in the early morning mist. He tied a canvas tarp over the opening, securing it with bricks. The sounds didn't stop. They intensified. Scraping noises from beneath the tarp, like something dragging itself across stone. A gurgling that wasn't water flowing, but seemed labored. And sometimes, on the edge of hearing, a low, wet whisper, unintelligible fragments carried on the damp air. He started having nightmares. Dark, claustrophobic dreams of falling, of being pulled down into cold, crushing blackness, of unseen things slithering against his skin. He woke up sweating, the strange metallic taste in his mouth. He stopped going near the well. He bought cases of bottled water and drank nothing else. He avoided looking out the windows that faced it. But the sounds seemed to follow him into the house, muffled but persistent. The scraping, the gurgle, the whisper. One evening, the power flickered and died. A storm was gathering outside. Rain lashed against the glass, thunder rumbled in the distance. The house plunged into absolute darkness. His phone was dead, no flashlight. He fumbled for matches, his heart pounding. Then, cutting through the sound of the storm, he heard it. A loud, wet slurp from the direction of the well. followed by a sound that made the hairs on his arms stand on end, a heavy, wet thud on stone, right outside the kitchen door. He froze. The sounds continued. Dragging. Scraping. Moving towards the house. Panic flared. He backed away from the door, stumbling in the dark. He could hear it clearly now, a ponderous, heavy movement right outside, punctuated by the wet, sucking sounds. Something large, something amphibian, was moving on the rain-slicked ground. He fumbled with the old bolt on the back door, jamming a chair under the handle. He scrambled to the front door, doing the same. He retreated into the living room, straining his ears. The scraping came to the wall. A low, wet rubbing sound. Like something thick and heavy pressing against the old stone. He could hear breathing now. Slow, deep, rattling breaths that smelled of the well, that foul, sweet musk. He huddled in the corner, sweat slicking his skin. The scraping stopped. A silence fell, more terrifying than the noise. Then, a sound from the chimney. A wet chuckle. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. He screamed. It wasn't a brave yell, but a choked, pathetic whimper. Something dropped into the hearth with a wet splat. He heard it writhe, heard the sound of stone cracking. He scrabbled away, tripping backwards. A single, huge eye opened in the darkness of the fireplace. Luminescent, the color of stagnant pond scum, and utterly devoid of warmth or sentience. It blinked slowly. He scrambled towards the hallway, towards the stairs, towards anywhere. He could hear the wet, dragging sound following him. He fumbled for the banister, heart hammering against his ribs. He reached the top of the stairs and slammed the bedroom door shut, locking it with a useless-sounding click. He leaned against it, gasping. The scraping started on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate. Each step protesting under an unseen weight. He backed away from the door, looking around the room wildly. The window. It overlooked the backyard. Overlooked the well. He crept to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. He couldn't see much in the darkness, but he saw movement near the tarp-covered well. A large, dark mass seemed to be heaving itself from the opening, slick and glistening in the faint moonlight. Something long and segmented, like an impossibly thick worm or centipede, coiled around the wellhead. And from this mass, appendages extended, testing the ground, reaching. He heard a loud crack from downstairs. The chair against the back door. The scraping on the stairs was closer. Right outside the door now. He spun around, eyes wide with terror. He knew, with bone-deep certainty, that there was nowhere to run. This thing hadn't just come from the well, it was the well. Or perhaps the well was just its mouth, and its body extended down into the very bones of the earth. A wet, probing tentacle snaked under the gap beneath the door. Black, glistening, pulsing slightly. It felt its way across the floorboards, slow and deliberate. Arthur choked back a sob. He was trapped. The house, his inheritance, had become his tomb. The door groaned, splintering near the lock. The tentacle retracted, then slammed against the wood with incredible force. Once. Twice. The door buckled, splits widening. He pressed himself against the far wall, covering his mouth with his hand to stifle his whimpering. The door burst inward with a crash of splintered wood. Framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the faint light from the stormlit yard, was a shape that defied description. A hunched, amorphous mass of wet flesh and shadow, covered in glistening scales or thick, chitinous plates. It had too many limbs, some ending in claws, others in suckers. And where a head should have been, there was only a gaping maw, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth, from which the foul, sweet odor emanated. It paused, its form seeming to fill the doorway. The only discernible feature was that single, vast, pond scum eye, now staring directly at him from the center of the mass. It let out the wet, rattling breath again. And from the void of its mouth, a sound emerged. Not a roar, but the same low, wet whisper he had heard from the well. But now it was clearer, coalescing into a single, terrifying word repeated over and over, like the gurgling of a drowning man. Thirst, thirst, thirst! It lunged. The last sound Arthur Finch heard was the tearing of fabric and the wet, final sound of something being swallowed whole in the absolute darkness. The storm raged outside, but the house fell silent once more, save for the soft, rhythmic drip of water from the corner of the empty bedroom, falling onto the splintered floorboards. The drip seemed to echo up from deep below. And down in the yard, the tarp lay askew beside the wellhead, revealing the dark, silent, patiently waiting mouth in the earth. Its thirst temporarily sated. For now.